la famille.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you so much for the invitation to come and share our story. We're very, very happy to be here. I'm joined by 3 other colleagues who should put their hands up right now so you know who they are. Eleanor, there you are, Luca at the back, and Bryce over here too. So I'm Tom, I'm a partner at Atomico. For those of you that aren't familiar with Atomico, we are a European technology investment firm investing in startups across Europe from Series A and beyond. One of my roles at Atomico is producing an annual report, the State of European Tech. Hopefully it was there on your chair when you sat down. Actually, there's 2 different reports, so you may have had a different one, and I'll come to that a little bit later. But it's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit of the story of what we found out. We've been doing this for a few years now, and I think it's something that's been really interesting to follow how things have developed, and we've certainly admired the way that the Berlin ecosystem has changed and evolved over the years too. And really our aim with producing this report is to try to tell your story, to try to tell the story of what entrepreneurs and others in the ecosystem are doing. And the reason we did it in the first place was because we felt there was a huge gap. There was a gap between the reality of what we saw day to day on the ground and the perception that we encountered when we spent time with policymakers, or when we spent time with big institutional investors, or when we spent time with the media. They weren't necessarily seeing the same things we were seeing. And so to try to close that gap, the best way to do that is to bring data to the table. And so that's what we've done, and I'm really happy to share with you some of our findings this evening. I'll try and rattle through it as quickly as possible, and then afterwards I'm delighted that I'll be joined by some friends to go into some of the topics in a little bit more detail. So what did this year's report tell us? Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, and the good news is that I'm going to sound like a broken record talking about breaking records, because last year was once again another record-breaking year for European technology. We had a record year for investments, we had a record year for exits, we had a record year for the number of billion-dollar companies that have emerged from the region, 19 in all across 9 countries just last year alone. To put that in some context, it took us something like 10 years to get from 0 at the start of the decade to 19 a little bit later on. And it's a remarkable thing that the fact is that if you had a $2 billion exit last year, you wouldn't have even made it into the top 5 of the year. And I think that's important because for the longest time, people didn't believe that it was possible to build companies to that scale. And now not only is it possible, it's happening consistently, time after time, year after year. And I think when you look beyond things like the fact that Europe produced 3 or 4 of the largest tech IPOs of the year globally last year, and you look beyond the public markets, there are plenty of companies who are building and staying private for longer and really growing in scale. And here in Germany, you can look at the likes of Auto One or N26 or Go Euro, and there are many, many others here in Germany and across the region as a whole too. And then looking beyond, the big giants at the earliest stages, both the number of rounds and the amount invested continue to march up and to the right, and really producing those types of graphs that we all like to see. And we've heard a lot of people say that tech has been seeing bigger but fewer rounds, but our analysis shows that in Europe that's certainly not the case. And I think to summarize, Europe is now both harvesting the fruits of its earlier labor, but at the same time sowing more promising seeds for the future than we've ever seen before. And I think when you talk about big milestones from last year, it would be remiss to not spend a little bit of time to talk about Spotify, a 30 billion IPO. And I think thinking beyond just that big number, that listing was unequivocal proof that European founders can think big and long term, can hire the best talent, can raise the right capital, can stave off what is, ferocious competition, go the full distance, and still win on a global stage. To me, I think it's a pretty good competition to have with people, which is, try and think of a company anywhere that has had fiercer competition than Spotify. Really having to fight off efforts from the world's largest tech companies and yet still come out on top. Well, what does that mean? It means it's a defining moment for the European tech ecosystem. And we really believe that what you can take from that is, never let anyone say to you that European companies can't compete on the global stage. Now, of course, it's not easy. Not everyone's going to make it. But certainly don't believe for a minute that it's not possible. And in fact, not only is it possible, but everybody who is there trying to replicate that success that Spotify has had is a critical part of the European economic future, full stop. When you look at overall economic growth rates here in Europe, it's clear that things have been stagnating. Last year, growth rates slumped to around 1%. That's the lowest rate we've seen in some time, and the forecasts for this year and next are not any brighter. Now, even before we've seen this drop-off in growth in the economy as a whole, it's been clear that Europe's tech industry has been growing at a rate that is significantly larger than the rest of the economy as a whole. We reckon it's been at least 5 times faster for the last few years, and that gap is now starting to widen as European technology accelerates and as traditional industry sectors, stagnate or in many cases decline. And as a result, what we're seeing here in Europe is that the tech workforce is growing incredibly quickly. To put that in context, we see that European tech workforce is growing at 4% year on year. That's compared to about 1% for the whole economy combined. So, really a dramatic gap starting to occur there. And tech is really now, bucking this trend of slow economic growth and represents a really critical bright spot for the continent. And of course, we see that here in Germany too, where that tech workforce growth is happening pretty much bang on with the European level, about 4% year on year too. So, as this has happened, it's helped to transform the performance of European venture capital. European venture capital hasn't always had the greatest reputation, I would say, with institutional investors. But now it's highly competitive with US VC and European private equity. And so, one of the things that we thought it would be interesting to do in this report would be to take a look at the sources of tech investment, to understand, who ultimately benefits from all of this growth that's happening. And in other words, to try to answer the question of, who funds the people that are funding the companies? Well, a couple of things have stood out to us when we've done this analysis. The first has been growth within what was previously conservative European family offices, who are now increasingly turning their attention towards technology investment. And over the last 5 years, family offices and individuals have invested over $5 billion into European VC. And so, to be clear and to put that in context, it's not pension funds, it's not sovereign wealth funds, it's actually governments, families, and then corporates that have been the 3 key backstops, to use a controversial word, to European tech funding for now. And I think, just imagine the possibilities when European technology and European VCs succeed in unlocking mainstream sources of institutional capital to go alongside those existing sources of funding today. So, I want to talk a little bit about talent. And in 2017, we spoke about this idea of a battle royale for talent. And what we saw was there were 3 fronts in this war for talent: startups competing with startups, startups competing with big tech giants from around the world, and startups increasingly competing with corporates who are obviously trying to recruit technical talent to transform themselves from the inside. Well, last year we think that the trend sort of that was interesting to us was about the effective mobilization of talent across a whole new generation of hubs within the European region. And what we're seeing is that Europe's tech communities are now growing fastest in the places that are outside the traditional strongholds of places like London, of places like Paris, and places like here in Berlin. And we think that this is changing and will continue to change the future of talent flows across the region. What's remarkable is that until now, tech workers have been 10 times more likely to move country than the average EU citizen in Europe. To me, that's extraordinary, and I think it's interesting that we're now going to enter a new phase in talent mobility that we're really sort of seeing that's coming on the horizon. So we think that there's been 3 interesting phases when you look at talent mobility. The first phase was really defined by the flow of European talent moving to the US to build companies. That was something that you saw frequently. People with great ideas thought they had to go to the Valley to build their company. We've been long since past that. And then we sort of moved into this second phase where talent choose to stay to build from Europe, but was increasingly choosing one of the major hubs within the region. Those 3 cities that I just spoke about spring to mind. Well, going forward, what we think is happening now is that we're sort of set to enter a third phase where talent simply chooses to stay where they are, emboldened by the quality of the local ecosystems that are now arising all across Europe as a whole. And the more that we see that this macro shift evolves, the more that 10x difference that I spoke about will start to contract. And so you might say then that this is perhaps not the time to put up barriers to put off talent from coming to you. And we're seeing that in the UK already. Last year, Germany caught up the UK as the #1 destination for intra-European migratory tech talent. We absolutely see that on that leading indicator, things have already started to shift in just the last 2 years in the UK. And Berlin has, of course, been a big beneficiary of this, as well as places like Amsterdam and to a lesser extent, Paris. So they say that people only remember the last thing that you say in any presentation. So with that in mind, I wanted to close before we go into the panel on the most important section from the report that we did last year. We all need to wake up to European tech's diversity and inclusion problem. From the outset of putting the report together last year, we really resolved to put this issue front and center in everything that we write. We challenged our partners on the data side to help us to measure what's happening. And we asked 5,000 people from across Europe to share their experiences in this regard. Because we felt that if you don't understand the problem, how can you hope to fix it? So we tried to quantify this in the report, as best as we can, and I would say it's not nearly enough, and it certainly makes for painful reading. But if these numbers don't wake us all up, it's hard to know what will. We think Europe's diversity and inclusion challenges are bleak. While the fundamentals of European tech have never been stronger, monoculture and discrimination are rife in the ecosystem. The data in the report highlights that just 7% of VC funds go to female or mixed gender teams in Europe. And the level of funding to other underrepresented groups is even lower than that. What's more, 46% of the women that responded to our survey said that they have experienced discrimination while working in the European tech industry. And so given those facts, we found it was even more surprising that 75% of people that responded to the survey claimed that the culture at their startup was inclusive. So when it comes to discrimination, it always seems to be somebody else's problem. I think these results are shocking, and I think the scale of the challenge that is ahead of the ecosystem is enormous. We believe that diversity and inclusion needs to be Europe's first and foremost priority. Just imagine how much talent, how much value has evaporated away from our ecosystem because of inertia on this issue. It's really only once people of all demographics, of all experiences, of all backgrounds feel safe and confident to participate that we'll truly realize the full potential of what's possible here in Europe. What's more, I think if Europe takes the lead on this issue, we can build ourselves a huge competitive advantage to other parts of the world that are less inclusive. So we've made this a rallying cry. We think that we all need to do better. We certainly need to look in the mirror and see what we can do. And if we do, everyone will benefit. It's a win-win. And I think the good news is, and what we highlight in the report, is that there are many initiatives aimed at inspiring and empowering women and other underrepresented communities that are tackling this issue head on. And they're already having a positive impact. We absolutely see that change is coming on this issue, and one such initiative that we really are close to is Diversity VC, and we chose to partner with them last year to launch an industry-first resource that's a practical and hands-on guide for technology entrepreneurs and leaders within technology businesses to help them to build companies that have diversity and inclusion at their core. There are copies of the report floating around. I really encourage you to pick one up, and if you don't get to pick one up, then just go to inclusionintech.com. What you'll find there is a series of practical, actionable recommendations for how to take those first few steps within your company to try to make progress on these issues. So, just to wrap up and before we go into the panel, our view is pretty clear that Europe's shown that it's benefited from achieving a certain type of diversity. We're strengthened here by the differences that we have. European tech is certainly richer for the blend of different cultures, languages, and heritage that we have. We're not like Silicon Valley here, which coalesced around a couple of universities and spin-offs within just a few square miles where everyone speaks the same language. We're not like China either. There's no single government here that can force change and help pick the winners in a closed market with a single culture and population. But to reach the full potential going forward, we need to harness the amazing differences in all of our people. And it's only then that we believe that European tech can reach the full heights that we know it to be absolutely capable of. And so with that, I will leave it there. We tried to cram in as much as possible. The report itself literally has hundreds of charts. We think of it as a resource for the community. Hopefully there's something in there for you. Please go and share it, please go and check it out, and I'll look forward to picking up on some of those topics now in the panel. So I think if I invite everyone to join me up on stage, we can dig right in. Thank you. Good evening. Okay, so I think the best way to start is going to be if you can all just spend very quickly a short moment, 30 seconds, just to introduce yourself, who you are, and who you represent, and then we'll get straight to it. I think we have one mic. Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Eyass from Frontier Car Group. Look after operations. We're basically, Tom mentioned Auto One earlier. We allow anyone to buy and sell cars within sort of an hour and get paid within that hour as well. And we do so in emerging markets based out of Berlin.
Hey, my name is Emilie. I work here at the family with Irina. I participate in the selection of startups and sort of advising them on any issues they have, including fundraising, so covering kind of a broad part of the topics that we're probably going to come up with tonight. And thank you so much for the presentation, by the way. It was great.
Hi, I'm Colin. I'd also like to thank the family and Tom for hosting us tonight. I'm an investor at a London-based firm called Balderton Capital. We invest in early stage across Europe. And before that, I worked at SoundCloud and lived here in Berlin. And I work in particular closely with our Berlin-based portfolio companies.
Hi, I'm Sofie. I'm founder and CEO of Omni. So we apply artificial intelligence to help the insurance space to rethink what they do, because they need a lot of help. So we process a high variety of documents for them. We push back structured data as a service, and based on these data lakes, they are in the position for the first time to really build new products, think about the future of insurance. And we are based in Berlin. We are very excited about what we do, and we are hiring.
Great. Well, before I get into my questions, I should say that we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time for all of you to ask questions to the panel too. So get thinking. We'll make sure that there is some time held back at the end. I think let's start by talking a little bit about building from Europe. And I think I'm going to come to you first, Eyass, if you don't mind. I look at the founding team there, and you're an international group. you are a business that is very, very international right from the outset in some countries that I think probably aren't on a lot of people's radars. So to me, the question is, well, why Europe? Like, and why Berlin? Talk us through that journey, you know.
Yeah, I think as Tom mentioned, you know, we have sort of in the founding team, you know, representatives from both Europe, US. I think, you know, Berlin, let's start with that, the easy one. You know, I think a lot of guys have paved the way for us to sort of tap into this quite large talent pool here in Berlin, right? So you had a lot of guys, a lot of companies have been around for a while, both harness the talent within Europe and Germany, but also abroad. And I think for us, the number one reason was sort of access to a wide talent pool. You know, being in Europe, Berlin has certainly become a lot more competitive over time. There's a lot of European cities out there. I think for us, Germany had quite favorable sort of opportunities of bringing people here, which certainly was another, you know, key factor. So I think, you know, the talent pool was number one. Second thing was, you know, we were at the time a small, scrappy startup. Balderton, one of our investors from the early days, you know, attracting talent as an unknown brand is always tough, right? I think that's where also, you know, the community and, you know, people move to Berlin often for more than just a job. And us being able to tap into that type of talent where, you know, without having a known brand in the country was very helpful. And the third thing was, you know, where we maybe failed a bit was proximity to our markets. You know, we operate in places like, you know, Nigeria, Indonesia, Mexico, Chile, India. Relatively, you know, that's very far away in absolute terms, but relatively, if you compare to where else we could have been, you know, Dubai was sort of in the discussion, but then the talent pool topic, which was our number one priority, failed. So relatively, you know, compared to other places, fairly close.
And if you can hand the mic over to Sophie, I'm gonna come to you and I'm gonna say, are there things from what you heard there that strike a chord with you, that are similar reasons for why you chose Berlin, or were there other reasons? And then maybe after that, where I'm going to go is, originally what I had here as the question was, you know, what's the advantage to building from Europe? But maybe I'll flip it and say, have there been challenges in terms of being based here, and how have you tried to overcome those? But the first one is, yeah.
Yeah, I was laughing because I was thinking, should I be honest or not? And I was like, yeah, whatever. So I fell in love with the other founder in Berlin. Because at that point I was single and I loved Berlin. I had my third company back then in Vienna in robotics and AI already. But I wanted to kind of move on, and I spent a lot of time here and I love the energy. So then I fell in love and I decided, okay, it's a perfect opportunity to move on. I wanted to do something else. After 10 years of having this robot company, I thought, okay, there is something else I want to start, and I had already an idea. So that's why Berlin. And looking back to the time when I started my third company in robotics in Vienna, I mean, you cannot compare it. It was crazy. It was 2004. The first fund started to act in Vienna in 2011. There was no opportunity to fund this company. I had to take huge loans. It was really difficult to start this company. Talent attraction, I mean, it was so difficult. Nobody had an idea what a founder is, a startup is. There was no ecosystem. So in comparison to that experience, I was just so thankful to be in Berlin. So many great founders, money, and yeah, a magnet for talent. Of course, a lot of challenges on the way, every day a new challenge. Today, a laptop started to exploded in the office.
That's a new one.
Exactly, that was a new one. So there's every day something. Yeah, a lot of challenges. Yeah.
Great. So, you know, I think what came through in both of those responses was the quality of the community that you've observed here. And maybe Emilie, if I come to you now, what you're doing here at the family is an amazing thing. It's something that you're doing in Paris too. Maybe you can perhaps comment on do you see differences between Berlin and Paris and the other cities where you spend time?
We see lots of differences, not only because we love stereotypes, so we try to see them to make sense of things and patterns, so we can find ways to act. What I can say is that, so we, just for a recap, we have an office in Paris, which we set up around 6 years ago, and then 2.5 years ago we set up one in Berlin and London. So it's fairly new, and people are self-selecting to apply, so maybe that is something to account for. In Paris, people know us quite well. That means they've been through our content wheel, I would say. They all email us like, I'm your biggest fan, and they've seen everything. And so we have a situation in Paris where the entrepreneurs that come to see us are actually, how could I call it? Like good students of entrepreneurship. It's kind of funny. I feel like entrepreneurs a few years ago used to be people that are on the edges, and they're a bit different. And now there's so much material that you can prepare, like you can prepare for a McKinsey interview to apply to a place like the family. And we're obviously, adjusting to seeing through that. But there's definitely this trend in Paris whereby people really know what to say, and they kind of know how to start. And then the problems start from there. So I would say in Paris, definitely you can sense that the ecosystem is maturing. In Berlin, we're actually struggling a lot. So I was really happy to see so many founders raise their hands here. And maybe we can discuss it afterwards, but we have some trouble understanding or fitting with founders here because we don't really understand, I guess, where to look, and maybe you can help me out, because it seems like Germany is such a decentralized ecosystem, and I went to Munich and I went to other places around the country, and it seems like the different hubs don't really speak to each other. So you have an information and a communication problem. You also have decentralized talent. So where are the universities compared to where are the industries? And the industries, I mean, it's like the Mittelstand, right? Like it gets super specific. That's why you have these very, very German, but amazing marketplace companies that come out of it just because the industries have been there for a really long time. And then the technical talent, might be in Berlin, but in Berlin there's, tech, which is still, quite small, and there's the government, which is, it's a whole other thing. So for us, Germany is really hard to grasp, and I would actually love to continue discussing this. And in London, we have the opposite problem, which is there's a lot of noise. There's just so much going on, and it's amazing. And we're just, I feel like, all arriving there, panicking and trying to get a hold of these great founders that are there. So Paris is our good balance between the three of them. That's what I can say for now.
Thanks, Emilie. Colin, I'm gonna come to you now and say, Emilie mentioned something which I think comes through very clearly in the data that we see, which is there's this remarkable geographic diversification happening across, not just in Germany but across Europe, and I think it feels like every month you look and there's a company being funded from a place that you think, wow, I had no idea, stuff was happening there. Is that something that you see too, in terms of there are really interesting companies emerging from surprising places?
The answer is definitely. I think we as a firm, probably the UK is our largest market, and in particular, probably the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, we've done pretty good job of accelerating investments we've made in particular places like the Nordics and France and the obvious places like Berlin. We haven't been as active in places like Spain or Estonia or Romania or you name it. But it's clear that they're starting to command. I mean, it's not a surprise really, right? When you think about it used to, what you used to have to do to build a really, really strong tech team in a software business 15 years ago versus what you have to do now. That people who are in places that seem far-flung are able to access, really, really strong developers. Maybe they're able to build a team, quite remotely. And certainly, I mean, we all know the story of how much capital there's being poured into, and places like Berlin are considered to be hot or over competitive, and so capital flows to the place where it can get the highest return. So it's the fact that that's happening. I wouldn't say we're necessarily the most front-footed on it, but we definitely are paying attention.
So I think the sort of the underlying reality is that great talent is distributed, and we have an incredible education system here in Europe that's fundamentally distributed geographically. And so one way we see that trend play out is companies sort of being built in different places. I wonder, for those of you that are building companies here in Berlin, how do you tap into that trend, if at all? So are you, I don't know, Eyass, if I come to you first, how do you think about hiring and bringing in people, given just the distributed nature of talent here in the region?
I mean, one data point, so we're about 1,500 people globally, about 70 here in Berlin. We're 4 Germans, and I'm not one of them. And so I think it just here, looking in the audience, the raise of hands of how many people are actually original Berliners, I think there were 2 or 3 maybe. I think for us, the way to be able to sort of attract and bring on board world-class engineers, especially which we do in Berlin, onto the team has been to look globally, right? And so, you mentioned the mobility of talent. I think oftentimes you'll find a lot of world-class people all across Europe that would love to move to Berlin, but then don't until the right opportunity presents itself. And if we can offer people to come here and we'll arrange the visa situation and housing for the first couple of months, then it really comes down to the individual of whether they want to take that step or not. But what we try to do is make it as easy as possible for world-class talent to move to Berlin. What we have seen is, quite a competitive situation in terms of recruiting people, that are already in the country, especially in the earlier days when no one knew what the hell, Frontier Car Group did. And now with, Grundesina articles here and some TechCrunch articles there, has it become, a bit easier? But certainly, I think we've been riding on the wave of mobility of talent. Now, to your second point during your presentation about this sort of mobility, detracting and people staying where they actually come from, that's something for us to think about in terms of how we'll tap into in the best possible way. I think we're still riding the high of the mobility of everyone wanting to move to Berlin, but I think the second point is quite refreshing.
And so, Sofie, for you, presumably, you're trying to attract a certain type of talent, and especially, in the AI field. Are you finding things different where you're really going after a certain specialist type of talent, that you have to approach things differently? It'd be great to hear your experiences on that side of things.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of effort and time to, kind of reach out to people all over the place. Today we are 67 people, and we have them from 31 nationalities. So 37 people of the whole company are from the tech team, and we had to relocate a third of them. So it was a huge effort, and it's really painful for them as well, because they have family and children, and we have to help them to find a job for their wife, etc., and a flat, and the whole relocation. But at the but it's possible. Yeah, it's challenging, but it's absolutely doable. And I think so. Where you have to start is with the first hires. When I moved here, I told my husband, I have no idea how I should attract the best AI talent from the whole planet. I have no money. I have no idea how I can start. And the clue is the first hires are really important. If you find and invest really a lot of time in hiring an amazing VP product, an amazing VP engineering for the data scientist team, someone who can really attract talent, then it's getting easier and easier. So that was my experience. So today we have 3 people in the HR team. I spend actually something like 40% with hiring. I'm part of the interviews. So for the best talent in AI, they have so many offers. So I sometimes go crazy because I know that my best people have literally 1 call from a headhunter a week. It's really, really crazy. And they get so much money offered. for them, it's really important to work on something meaningful, and that's why you should be clear from day one what your vision is, and talk about the why and talk about the purpose, because that's important for them. And that's why I'm involved in the hiring process, and then it's possible. So you can attract people, yes, it's challenging, but if you have a clear vision and if you know why you want to change a whole industry or disrupt a whole process, you can attract world-class talent from all over the place. And as I said before, I would never have been able to do that in Vienna, never. Berlin is a magnet for talent because they know there's not only Omni-Us, and if it doesn't work out with them, there are a lot of other great startups. So yeah, it's absolutely doable.
So you both talked a lot about relocation of talent, and I suppose one other way to tap into those talent pools in other places is to start to build in a distributed way, and it sounds like you're kind of already in that place. Colin, I don't know, from your experience within your portfolio, do you see that more founders and founding teams are looking to build in a distributed way, whereby you have one office and then you set yourself up in other places and basically start to expose yourself to new pools of talent? And is that something that you're comfortable with?
For sure. I think I put it, a founder put it to me pretty succinctly just the other week, which was, I care about hiring the best people and I don't care where they are, right? So particularly, depending on the problem you're solving, there are a lot of problems where you need the best people around the world, and some of them are willing to relocate and some of them are not, and depending on the culture you have of the company and the way that you're going about building it, a lot of them think that it's best for them to allow the people who are really the best at solving that problem to remain where they are. I think these days in Silicon Valley, if we were having this panel in San Francisco these days, a lot of founders are just, it's impossible to scale a team in the Bay Area these days unless you're, getting back to the tunes of the tens of millions of dollars very, very early on, just because the salaries that command talent these days are really, really extraordinary. So it's become really a necessity for a lot of companies, and we've been in a relatively privileged position in terms of wages here in Berlin for some time, but it won't last forever. The only other point I'd make is we have a really kind of well-regarded CTO in our portfolio at a company called Go Cardless, who had experience building out decentralized teams for Skyscanner. And what he said was, it was really important that if you have a decentralized office or a decentralized team, that they really feel like they have ownership over a certain part of the business, right? So that team itself is held accountable for delivering, whether it's an aspect of the product, whether it's a particular sales sort of quota, that they feel really accountable for something, and that you have at least one fairly senior person there to sort of act as a linchpin. But absolutely is something that people look to do and have to do these days.
Great. Well, I'm going to change tact a little bit now, and I think we've talked a lot about talent, and talent is, of course, about people, and so much of the comments that you shared were around the level of competition, and of course, inherent in the success of the tech ecosystem is a ramping in competitive dynamics. One way that potentially we can address this is if we finally start to fish in all the pools. And I spoke about the diversity and inclusion challenges that we have here in this industry, and so maybe we can spend some time on that issue. And I think it's clear that the industry needs to move forward. It's clear that everyone, including people like us at Atomico, have a responsibility to help move this in the right direction. It would be great if you could share some of the experiences that you've had within your companies of how you've sought to try to build a more diverse and inclusive organization. And I don't know who wants to go first, but Emilie, great, thank you.
Okay, cool. So this is a big topic right now, and not only right now, it's kind of always been, and the fact that we have to talk about it every year is a bit exhausting but also exciting, because I guess there's still a lot we can build on. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm involved in the selection of startups and supporting them and helping them raise funds, which means that when anyone comes into the family in one way or other, I kind of see how far they go, where they drop off if they do, and where they start to take off. And putting that in the diversity angle, I'm just going to go with male, female, because that's the sort of data that I've looked at the most. I'm not really proud of sort of where we are right now, but I'm proud of what we're working on. So very few women apply, maybe because our website is a bit aggressive, although it was designed by our female CEO, Alice. And very few female entrepreneurs apply. Then they get through at an even lower rate, and then they become what we call zombie companies at a very high rate, which means the companies that kind of just don't really die, don't really succeed, but just kind of hang in there. And then raising funds, I mean, there are not many examples. So what we've been doing, and I've been working on this personally, is thinking, okay, what can we do and what's the problem here? Is it our fault? Is it the system? What's happening? And I realized that at the family we're in a very privileged position, which is that we designed our organization to have perfect incentive alignment with founders. And I say founders, and I put an emphasis on that because it's with founders and not with companies. So obviously VCs have their own constraints because they invest in companies. So if they invest in a company and the company fails, well, they lost everything. When you invest in a founder, you invest in company A, which might fail, company B, which might fail, but company C might be the one. And that means that we have time. And when you have time, you can do a lot of things with people. So the first thing I started to really think about is, okay, this time that we have, like, how do we use it, and how do we make sure that we transform these people that, like these women that can definitely become amazing founders, but are not quite there yet, and how do we make the most of that time? So the first thing I realized, which is quite sad, is that when I'm doing interviews, I'll spend half an hour with any person that applies. I started spending an hour and a half with women. My calendar is quite crazy these days, but I think that's how long it takes. And the simple reason is that I think at the heart of it is really self-confidence. Self-confidence affects the way people see you, so it's much harder to sell what you're doing, much harder to get them excited. It also affects what you think you can do. If you're not confident, you don't even imagine that you're going to be able to transform a market or be valued in the billions. Like really, if I talk to women as opposed to men about this theme, they kind of go like, wait a minute, like they don't want to talk about it. So what I do is I sit for an hour and a half, and usually that's how long it takes to comfortably say if someone, has the motivation, the passion to do something about it. And so now we're working on this whole the family program to help train, prepare, and increase the confidence of these women so that they can come into the family. Because honestly, when they do, then it's kind of an explosion, and if they're ready, things work out. So I guess that's what we're doing. It's not as quantitative as I thought it would be, but yeah, that's the gist of it.
No, thank you for sharing. Sophie, do you want to spend a little bit of time about how things work inside Omnius?
Yeah, so I'm a woman, so that's a good starting point to build a company based on diversity. So 31 nationalities, that's a good starting point in general, talking about diversity. And my leadership team is, by the way, awesome, 10 people. We are 4 women, so that's a kind of good ratio. And for a deep tech company, we have also a good ratio, 30% in total are women. Perhaps it's easier for me to attract female engineers and female data scientists. Yes, that's an advantage. And yeah, I mean, talking about disadvantages, yes, I mean, we all have some disadvantages here and there. I always try to be a little bit ignorant of my own disadvantages in general, and I try to focus on opportunities. And in this case, with this company, I really try to focus on my product and the amazing team and my vision. I was able to raise 14 million, and yes, I got a lot of declines from, for example, this guy here. We are still friends, by the way. Yes, and I struggled, like all founders. I didn't give up, I pushed further, I raised a really proper A round. Now, probably you regret that you didn't invest. No, but I mean, I would turn it around. Perhaps it was a disadvantage in one context, I don't know. Every decline I got was 100% not because I was a woman. I know that, and I know exactly where I did a good job and where I didn't do a good job. And perhaps I, say something provocative. Perhaps it was an advantage. The whole tech world is desperately searching for female entrepreneurs in deep tech. I'm constantly searching for female entrepreneurs in my space to exchange notes, and it's really, really difficult. Perhaps in, 2 years, I have a really great advantage because there are no other female entrepreneurs in that space. And the VC world, I mean, it's super embarrassing for a VC to have only 1% of female entrepreneurs. I mean, they are getting in a really tricky situation. Yeah, now everybody's looking at them. What is your ratio? I mean, it's really hard for them, right? And and we have to be very honest to ourselves. Perhaps we exclude ourselves from spaces like AI. Yeah, I don't know the reason why women are not starting companies in that field, but I know that the pipeline for a VC is pretty desperate too. So it's not that the 7% of funded women, they have a correlation to the amount of female entrepreneurs they see every day, right? So. That's something I just want to mention. We can also just include ourselves in that space.
I think one of the secrets of success of the ecosystem here in Europe for the longest time has been the power of inspiration through amazing role models. And for a long time, all those role models were male. And now it's great that we can have people stepping up that are, going to be of all sorts of backgrounds that will serve as, role models for the next generation. And so hopefully that becomes something that does accelerate change. But Colin, since we were called out here, it would be great to hear if you're happy to share. How does Balderton think about this?
First off, I think I'll forever regret not working with Sofie, genuinely. I think you said the same, Tom, and I think we can do a lot better ourselves as a firm. The numbers for us are of the 13 people on the investment team, 4 are women, so that's 30%. But in the partnership, we have no women, which I think is a problem. The second piece that I've seen, I think, kind of Sofie alluded to, is I've seen female entrepreneurs come and pitch, but it's been very, very scarce. And so you can say that part of that is the number of fish in the sea, or it's how you fish. And I think there's probably problems with both. How you address those problems is again very difficult. I'm a believer in sort of unconscious bias training and really taking efforts on that front. But there's also a hard truth, which is I think people like to invest in people who are maybe similar to them, or who speak their same language, or who sort of kind of subliminally know how to behave in a certain context. And the truth is most of the VCs are dominated by older white men, right? It's just that's how it is. And I'm a white man myself, so you kind of have to take a step back and think, how much of the problem are sort of we perpetuating, and how much of the problem is maybe something that's harder to control, but it's something that we as Sofie said, I think we look hard, and we definitely are we feel like sometimes it's been difficult historically to become a successful female founder, and so it often when you see somebody, they're usually incredibly impressive, like Sofie is, and we continue to really try to back that ecosystem. We had Czech Warner in our offices for about a year, who's the founder of Diversity VC, and she's starting actually her own fund, saying explicitly we're going to go fish in the places where nobody else thinks it's good to fish, because actually that's where we're going to see outlying opportunities. So I think as strategies like that prove successful, hopefully it wakes and shakes people up that there is sort of, not only is it sort of ethically or morally something good to do, but it actually could be financially something good to do, which is, that might be often a powerful incentive, because it is. So
yeah.
Sure. I think the way we look at it, I think we were fortunate to have some really remarkable women on our tech team from the very early days, and so I think that was very helpful for us. The way we think about it is sort of bringing people into the company is one thing, and then creating an environment for any group to thrive and be comfortable in that environment is the second point. I think in terms of bringing people into the company, so we think that biases oftentimes are accentuated when you have a lack of structure in the hiring process, right? So if we sit down and have a conversation, and then on the back of that conversation I'm going to decide whether we will hire you or not, then a lot of biases are likely to emerge and drive that decision making. I think when we structure our hiring processes, we make sure, we purposely try to minimize for that scenario, meaning having people from different teams interviewing the candidate, having people from diverse backgrounds interviewing each and every candidate, and then we have a sort of try to make sure we stay as diverse as we are today. As we discussed earlier, we're 70 people in Berlin, about 38 nationalities, 22 languages, and so for us, diversity has been closer to maintaining what we have today rather than trying to change something, which is a fortunate position to be in, because it's a lot easier going from 100% white male and then trying to change that than just sort of maintaining status quo.
Emilie, you said it was exhausting, and I think it's a sentiment that I've heard a lot of people repeat, which is we spend all the time focused on the negatives, and it's probably time to flip the conversation to the positives around it. And I think that becomes about lifting up the stories of where it's working, lifting up the examples of things that have really made an impact within organizations, lifting up the examples of the amazing role models. And I think when we do that, hopefully that's something that can then drive the conversation in a new direction and drive the change and sort of bend the curve in a positive way. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. And as I said at the start, we wanted to leave time for questions from the audience. So I'm hoping there are one or two out there. They say to wait 7 seconds for someone to put their hand up. There's one at the back.
Let's go from here.
Here we go, one at the front. Let's go there first.
Yeah, so thank you very much for all your opinions. My name is Sufrajit. I have a question on something a bit different. So we've been talking a lot about diversity and the flow of capital. What I missed was, like, when you're starting a company, irrespective whether it's a startup or any kind of organization, the architecture and the structures plays a big role in deciding how successful it would be as it scales up. So what's been your experience on that front?
Anyone want to take that? You've got to 1,500 people, so something's clearly working there.
Just to clarify, sorry, the structure of what exactly?
What's your organizational structure? So that plays a big role in deciding how your organization is going to react to challenges, how agile it's going to be, or is it something like a top-down hierarchy and stuff like that? So
yeah, I think when you're sort of a fast-moving, fast-growing organization, it always feels like you have the wrong structure in place because growing at the higher rate is always painful. I think for us, we've had the added challenge of being, we're building the technology here in Berlin, shipping it to very remote countries, and so I think what we try to spend some time on, from the very early days, was how do we make sure the people who actually build the technology are building it, with the end customer in mind at every decision point. And so I think, when you're sort of low on money in the bank account, it's obviously difficult to send people to Nigeria, to Pakistan, to India on a regular basis, right? And we've just tried to spend a lot of time bridging that gap, making sure that we're actually always serving the needs of the customer. Now, what that means from an organizational or structural perspective is not so much how the org chart looks, but rather how we work on a daily basis, how we make sure we always incorporate customer feedback and client input into everything we do. We're in quite unstructured markets with a lot of, with European eyes, basic problems to solve, and we're making sure that that's always sort of what we have on the highest on the agenda.
Hi, I'm Mauricio. There's a couple of tools that are available for business for a long time, and my question is, how often do you see, for example, all things that like values being used to cope with this idea of bias? Because values can work for that. I don't know if any one of you has already seen a company using the values, like, for example, respect or transparency, to enforce this idea of reducing bias.
I love the topic values. And I think I have our values with me. I always have them with me. So I can just read through them. I think values are an amazing tool because it gives clarity, and you can, it's a reference to everything. So this is our little value booklet. So I have different values. Keep on breaking walls, which means, of course, that you should never give up. Find your own way and break through. Fuck it up but fix it. This is something we don't share with our customers. Ship and celebrate. So we are proud to have real business impact. We win the hearts of our customer and we listen to each other. And be loving, which sounds cheesy, but it's about saying thank you, saying sorry. We share our shoes for miles is one part of this value, which means that we can never judge another person. So to be very honest, I think the reason why people are really, really motivated working at Omnias is because of our values, and we really try to live them. They refer to it a lot. So fuck it up and fix it is, I think, every week the subject of a mail. I'm very sorry, I fucked it up. I'm very convinced that it's so important to have values for a lot of different reasons. And talking about tools, I also love OKRs. That's something I can strongly recommend. That's wonderful. To combine clear KPIs, strong values, with OKRs and a process around it. So you have structure, back to your question, and there are a lot of tools how to implement structure in a good place. And with values, you can just let them go, and you can really, you don't have to micromanage anymore. So the combination of clear goals on a quarterly basis with values is a wonderful recipe I can strongly recommend.
Another question? There was one at the back.
Great. Just a quick note before asking my questions. I wanted to I'll tell you something, the founder of Omninus. So I have I'm working at Plug and Play Tech Center. I'm an investor there, and one of the venture associates there is always saying that nowadays it can be a strength actually to be a woman in the tech world, and I totally agree with her. I think that sometimes, as you get a few in numbers, but still, the few of them are really great, and it's a really great ecosystem. And when it comes to my questions, so more on the Atomico, to talk a bit more about the Atomico. I was in the slush, and I read actually your booklet, and I saw that London was far away in front of Berlin and Paris, right? In the tech, and I wanted to ask you your thoughts about the Brexit, and how do you think it will? I mean, I'm pretty sure you prepared this question already, right?
I thought I'd be able to avoid Brexit. It makes me sad, honestly. You know what? I'll be honest. I think the UK likes to shout a lot about how many billion-dollar companies it's built, and it likes to shout a lot about how much capital has been invested. And I think those are remarkable achievements. to me, they are what I would call lagging indicators. They tell you of where the UK has had historical strength. I think what's interesting and what we've unpicked a little bit in the report actually is some more forward-looking indicators of where things are going. The UK has been tremendously dependent on talent from overseas. Something like 40 to 45% of all people working in UK venture-backed tech startups are not British. So we need that talent. What we have seen for the last 3 years on a consistent basis is a decline in the market share that the UK has of capturing people that are moving across borders, either into Europe or across borders between European countries in the tech industry. So it is starting to see a slight erosion in terms of being, an attractive destination for technology. And I think whether the borders for talent to cross are real or imagined, if you create a perception that you're, potentially not as open, then that's going to become, an issue for you over the long term, particularly when you put it in the bigger context, which was opportunity in the tech industry has never been more geographically spread, and B, actually people are probably going to move a little bit less, as I talked about in the presentation. Then you kind of need to make sure that you are doing everything you can to create an environment where you're open and welcome to talent. So certainly a lot of our efforts are in trying to engage at the right level in the UK to ensure that we make sure that this thing that has for so long been an advantage doesn't become something that impacts the long-term prosperity. I don't think things are going to change dramatically, but there are risks there around talent for sure. It's something that we worry about.
I actually have to make a little stop because unfortunately you have to go to the airport.
That's true.
So we'll have Tom, we'll send off Tom, and then we'll have you do maybe a couple of more if that's okay with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm very...
You can stay if you wish. I would love to.
I will get in so much trouble if I miss this flight. Well, thank you for having a slight awkward pause. Thank you to all the panelists. Have a good rest of the night. It's going to be fun. Cool. And I'll hand the mic over, literally.
Does anybody of you guys have more questions for the 4 panelists? Perfect.
Thanks for the panel. So I have a question to the mobility of talent. So I try to employ people or to get people from other countries to Germany, like Turkey and Russia, and I face really big problems doing that. So basically a little bit background, it's so the people had like relevant experience, many years in their respective sector that was required for the job, but for example didn't finish their studies or studied something different, but then kind of educated themselves to match the job requirements. And so I tried it multiple times. We got a lot of refusals from the foreigner office, Auslandsbehörde in German. So I would like to ask you if you also face that kind of problem, or you think that it's not that's not a problem, and if you have faced that, how did you solve it? And yeah.
I can kick off, and then guys, if you have anything. So I think, the regulation and everything around that is always a challenge, right? Unfortunately, I'm from Sweden originally, and that's about 10 times tougher than Germany. Luckily, I think Germany has sort of scaled that entire process to make it a lot easier, because they understand that the country relies on foreign talent to build all these amazing tech companies founded here. Now you mentioned some very specific cases around not having finished education and so on. Obviously, there's some regulation around that. And what we've done, we started off with a very time-consuming process, just like the one you're mentioning. And then over time, you sort of start to learn the ins and outs of how to scale that and make it efficient. I think from your perspective, I think you mentioned that you've been trying to bring people in from Russia and Turkey. I think those two countries actually, so Russian after English is the most widely spoken language in our office. And rules are rules, unfortunately. But I think in relation to the cases that you mentioned, it's always about finding the right in and making the government sort of understand that talent that you're looking for is hard to come by in Germany, and usually if you're convincing enough to express that this is sort of a win for Germany, usually these process issues and so on tend to clear up. For now, actually, since we've hired so many people from abroad, we work with a third-party agency now, and that has helped a lot because they know all these ins and outs and tricks. Obviously, it's tougher, early on.
How many people are you right now? Yeah. Okay, so it's really, really tricky at the beginning. So the first hires, I spent hours, and I had phone calls, and it's really, really difficult and super painful. So I can just empower you to not give up, So now now it's easier, as he said, and I can just add one story. Because I really wanted to hire this person. I met a woman in Nicaragua when I was backpacking in January last year. And I thought, this woman is so smart. No education, nothing. I was so impressed. I was like, wow, I would love to employ this person. But of course, there was no chance. It was just this thought. Half a year ago, she wrote me an email. The economic situation in Nicaragua is so critical, and she is so frustrated. Is there any opportunity for her to work for me? And I was like, difficult. She said, hey, I would leave my country, my 2 kids, my husband. I'm really desperate. I need work. So I told my office team, head of office, whatever. They were like, no, head of office needs to be German. So and then I had the chance to hire someone from my my PA, my assistant in the office, and I said, okay, wonderful, I hire her. Because it was my decision, hiring process, I had 2 thumbs to give, so I was like, yes, that's my strike, I will do that. And of course, it was nearly impossible to get her, because Nicaragua, dictatorship, German government was like, this person has no education at all. So my HR team said, sorry, Sofie, we can't do that. And I was like, no, there must be a way. I don't buy that. So I was really fighting it through, and now she's here since 2 weeks, and it's wonderful to have her here. And it was really a case where everybody told me that's not possible. This time, Sofie, we cannot solve the unsolvable. This is what I always say. So I can just encourage you to not give up, and the more often you do it, the more easy it is. And then you end up like me, like, no, we can hire this person from Nicaragua without any education. So, it's possible.
Anybody else?
Is anyone working with a sort of distributed team today across, Europe or elsewhere? Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, if there is no more, thanks a lot for being here, for answering wonderful questions. Thanks for coming, and please stay, chat with us. If you want to talk about the family, come to me or to Emilie, and we hope to see you soon.
Que la famille.